today. So if somebody can't make it, they can view it later. But thank you very much for joining us today. My name is London Wadike, and I am a state extension food safety specialist. I work for both Kansas State University and the University of Missouri Extension. But today I'm here in my role with Kansas. And we're really excited to have you joining our virtual workshops this year. When we planned the virtual workshops, obviously it was because of the public health situation going on, but turns out weather-wise, it was probably a good time to have it be virtual as well. So, and we have a great week planned. Yesterday we talked about value-added foods, so some of you might have joined us for that. Today we're going to be hearing from Mike Fink about our meat and poultry regulations. Tomorrow from noon to 1, we'll be hearing from our colleagues at the Department of Revenue about sales tax. And then we'll also hear from about how to accept the SNAP program, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, how to accept the electronic benefit transfer for that when you're direct marketing to consumers. And then on Friday will be our big day from 8:30 to 12:30. We'll have a keynote speaker, Michael Kilpatrick. He's going to talk about how selling directly to consumers can increase your margins, grow your business, and reduce stress. And then we'll be hearing from KDHE about COVID-related changes to direct marketing, farmers markets, etc., because of COVID. We'll hear about the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, also from KDHE. And then our partners with Kansas Department of Agriculture, I forgot to mention that at the beginning, this is a joint KDA and KSRE workshop. So our partners with KDA will talk about the From the Land of Kansas program. And then we'll be hearing about the Double Up Food Bucks program that you can also work towards implementing at your farmer's market. So we really appreciate your time listening to us today. Hopefully today is still a nice day to be inside. It's a little bit warmer than yesterday, thankfully, but hopefully you'll be learning something today while you're here with us. So a few housekeeping things that I want to mention before we get started further. So during the presentation portion of the webinar, all the participant microphones will be muted. If you do have a question during the presentation, we really encourage you to put that into the Q&A box. And I see there's already some things in there, so that's great. So please put your questions in there. And we have Mike Pierce with KDA also on the line to help with answering questions. So please feel free to ask questions. That's why we're here. So we'll be monitoring those to get answers back to you. If at any time during the webinar, if you're asking a question, it'd be helpful for us to have your name, city, and then market or business if applicable. That just helps us to be able to provide better answers to your questions. It gives a little more context so we know what angle you're coming from. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded. It'll be posted online afterwards for all participants. So, and then we'll be, as much as possible, we'll also post the presentations online afterwards if you want a copy of the slides. If you're selling pet treats or live plants, those particular topics will have handouts and videos that are already posted on the workshop website. And one of my colleagues, I'm sure, will put that into the chat box for the direct link to that. Next, hopefully you'll remember, if you registered by February 8th, and requested to receive copies of our regulations for farmers markets, direct to consumer sales publication, and or our food labeling publication. Hopefully you've received those in the mail by now. That's if you registered by February 8th. If you registered after February 8th, hopefully you'll be getting those next week. It takes a little while to get those in the mail to you. If you did not request to receive one of those publications, let us know and we can get additional copies to you. We are very appreciative of the Kansas SARE program and the Kansas it's KSAC, Sustainable Ag. I can't remember the exact acronym, sorry, but Carrie Ebert with SARE has sponsored this workshop so we can provide those publications for free. So we really appreciate her support. Okay, so I am going to now turn it over to my colleague, Janelle Dobbins. And one other thing I also need to mention, and maybe Janelle can help us with the wording on this. As you'll notice, there's closed captioning on the bottom of the screen. And if you would prefer not to see the closed captioning on the bottom of your screen, if it's kind of distracting you, you can go down to the more, or is it more? More, I think, and then you can say hide subtitles. So if you don't want to see those, you can do it that way too. So now I'm going to turn it over to Janelle.
Thanks, Londa. As Londa said, I'm Janelle Dobbins with the From the Land to Kansas program, which is part of Kansas Department of Agriculture. And we are excited today to have our meat and poultry team with us. But we're first going to, just to give them a bit of a background, we're going to launch a poll here where all of you can kind of talk about how you're selling your meat products. So we'll give you here about 30 seconds to answer. And just doing this poll kind of helps our team to know what different ways folks are selling meat and poultry products before they start speaking today. Okay, it looks like we have a majority of folks answered here. We'll give you 3 more seconds and I'll have Londa then end it and give us the results. So it shows that 91% are selling meat and poultry products direct to consumers, as in farmers market, farm stands. And then we have 29% doing poultry products on farm exemptions, or 29%, and then 24% doing meat and poultry products to businesses, wholesale, restaurants, and groceries. So that should definitely help our team kind of know. So now, as I said, today is Meat and Poultry. Our compliance officer, Mike Fink with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, will be providing information on where, when, and how you can sell meat and poultry. And then, as we said, Mike Pierce will be helping answer questions in the Q&A during the presentation, but we'll also be taking live questions. And I should say live, as in if you put them in the Q&A, we'll ask them live at the end and make sure everyone is aware of the answers. So take it away, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much, Janelle. Let me see if I can get the screen shared here. Can you see that, Janelle?
Yep, I can see your screen. You just need to put it into PowerPoint mode. Yep, hit that button.
There it goes. I was clicking on it like crazy. There we go.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, as Janelle said, my name is Mike Fink. I'm a compliance officer, and I'm also what they call an EIAO, an Enforcement Investigative Analysis Officer, which means I go into plants and I review their HACCP plans a lot of times. Next guy is David Stuhlzotz. He's also a compliance officer. And then the gentleman asking questions is Mike Pierce, who also wears a couple hats. He's the field inspection supervisor and also an EIAO. Meat and poultry is actually 2 programs into one. The first one is compliance. Let me reduce this down here. Is compliance. And really what compliance does is I actually come out into the field and I will do a review of the wholesalers once per year or more often if necessary. I also investigate consumer complaints. That could be the fact of, let's say, a door-to-door salesman was acting unscrupulously, or you were, as a wholesaler, selling misbranded product. And then, like I say, and then also against economic fraud, which would be also our Attorney General's laws, the 50-901 series. The second way that the meat and poultry program works is through inspection. We have inspectors that provide on-site inspection during slaughter and processing. And during that time, I always tell everybody, you will see an inspector look at your live animal as he's backed up and put into the kill chute, and you will see an inspector viewing the actual processing, the cutting and packaging and labeling of your meat. Our program, it's modeled after the federal program, and we're operating on what we call the equal to status. Basically, that means our program will be equal to, but our regulations will not exceed what they do. So what they do is what we can do, okay? It started out in 1970s when we launched the program. We have 34 employees. We have 1 program manager, an office manager, field inspection manager, 2 compliance officers, 6 area supervisors, 7 EIOs. We do have 1 veterinarian that does work dispositions. We have a training officer and then 24 field inspectors. A lot of us wear 2 different hats at the same time. For an example, the 7 EIAOs that we have are also training officers, they're area supervisors. So like I say, we wear a lot of different hats. The difference between federal and state, I have a lot of people that wonder about this. And in a nutshell, if you're federal and it bears the USDA mark of inspection, the meat products can go interstate commerce. So you could take your Kansas product, sell it in Missouri, Nebraska, Hawaii. I do warn people, if you're shipping to Canada, there are import laws. And so anyway, you need to be very wary of that, okay? So anyway, federal inspection, it's conducted by USDA. State inspection is conducted by KDA meat and poultry employees. Again, one is intrastate, the other one is interstate. And here's a big difference. If you're federal, you actually operate what's called the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the FMIA. If you're Kansas, you operate under the KMPIA, the Kansas Meat and Poultry Inspection Act. Again, we adopted a lot of their verbiage from their FMIA, but there are differences in between there. Part of the difference, as you can see, state inspected meat can only be sold intrastate. You'll see buffalo, elk, fallow deer. They are amenable under the KMPIA. And what that means is our laws do apply to those. But the federal act, they do not apply to those. So at that point in time, to make them amenable, you have to pay for that inspection. And I think a lot of people have figured out with buffalo, it might cost you $50 for the slaughter, if not more. And it might cost you $50 an hour for 2 hours to get it processed. So it can cost you an extra $150 if you use a federal program for bison or elk or fallow deer. Different types of slaughter processing facilities. And I tell everybody, this is very important when you're going to sell meat, whether it's out of your farm or you're going to sell it into a grocery store. They operate in a lot of different ways. The first one is it's fully inspected. When you back up with the trailer and you let that animal out of the trailer, you'll see an inspector do what they call an antemortem. He will look at that animal, note any health problems with it. Basically, it receives an antemortem and it receives a postmortem, or they'll watch it being killed and skinned and eviscerated. They will make sure that the end carcass is healthy. They will put a stamp on it, says inspected and passed. During the processing, the inspector will also be there. That's a fully inspected plant, all the way to the bitter end. And at the end, you will see the mark of inspection on your package. That's what you guys need right there, is fully inspected and passed. Or the other option is going custom. And when you're using a custom plant, basically slaughter and process animals delivered by the owner, which go back to the owner for their own consumption. That's very important. Back to the owner for their own consumption. What that means is I'm going to take in an animal, I'm going to have it slaughtered. It's going to say not for sale on the package, and it comes back to me for my own consumption. The other one is a custom plant with a retail exemption. Same deal. If I bring in the animal, it is going to say custom, not for sale. And that's exactly what that means. Not for sale, for my own consumption. But what happens is with the retail exemption, they buy in inspected and passed product. And that could be boxed meat from Excel or boxed meat from Fanasteel or anywhere where it's inspected and passed. And they will basically break the bulk on that, and they will put it in their retail counter to sell to the end consumer. Again, communication is important with the plant owner. Express the intent of the product, that if you would, and just tell the guy, I'm going to sell this at the farmer's market. I'm going to sell it on Facebook. I'm going to wholesale it into Hy-Vee or wherever, any grocery store. That he will understand what needs to be done. A fully inspected plant can also operate in a different facet. Basically, just because you see an inspector there, maybe he was just there doing a patrol for the processing and he wasn't there for the kill. And what that means is your animal didn't receive any inspection on the kill floor, so it can't bear the mark of inspection. So again, make sure the intent is told to the plant owner that you're going to sell this meat, because otherwise it could come back. Even if it's a fully inspected facility, it'll operate as a custom plant, because all it's going to do is send the meat back to you. So it could say not for sale. So again, communicate that to the plant owner. Again, they need to know it needs full inspection, that it's going to be labeled, and that they don't put not for sale on it. We do what we call a label approval. Mike Pierce, the gentleman answering questions, does a lot of this. And you're going to see that their 9 CFR 317.2 states in there, it will have the name of the product. So it's going to have to be identified by species: whole chicken, beef, T-bone steak, pork chop. So anyway, it has to be identified by species. It will have the mark of inspection on it if you're going to sell it, the inspection legend. If it's summer sausage or beef jerky, or has more than one ingredient, it will have an ingredient statement. The safe handling, it will be on there also. That's part of an official label. The signature line, basically it can say packed for XYZ Farms, or it can say packed by blah, blah, blah. Okay, the next one, step 5, the net weight statement. All we require by law is NET, WT, period, with a line after it. That's very important. And this, again, you need to communicate to the plant, whether they need to put the net weights on the product, or you have a certified scale that you keep certified yearly. And that is the one thing we will allow by law written on a label, is the net weight. I tell everybody, if you're thinking about, let's say you take in a butcher bowl, and you have 1,000 pounds of ground beef, and you just decide you're going to sell that by the package of, let's say you have 1,000 pounds of ground beef, 1,000 packages, 1 pound packages. If you don't weigh those, you could be possibly giving away the farm. And I'll tell you right now, there's always human error involved, and sometimes equipment won't be 1 pound right on the button. I've seen those packages go from 0.87 to 1.2 pounds. Now, you figure 1.2, if you don't weigh it and you sell it as a pound, it's 0.2 times 1,000. You're giving away a lot of meat and probably your whole profit margin. So I tell everybody, it's important. You want to sell this meat price per pound. Operate just like a grocery store. KDA meat and poultry license registration. As you can tell, there's a lot of different things that we regulate. Wholesalers, that would be basically you guys that are doing that. An animal food manufacturer, a public warehouseman, even somebody who has a 1 million square foot warehouse with meat in it. I'll go in and I'll make sure that the conditions are acceptable. A broker who basically doesn't even handle the meat, I'll go in and review their records. And then occasionally I will go in and do inspected custom slaughter and or processing facility inspections. When is a license required? That's the big question of the day right there. And anytime that you are basically selling prepackaged meat by the piece, that's pretty much where we draw the line at. Doesn't matter whether you're going to the end consumer, or if you're going wholesale, or if you're going retail right out of your store. If you're doing meat bundles, hamburger steaks, cuts, you need to register. It's not a deal breaker. It's a $25 registration fee. That is for 1 year. I always tell everybody that's the best kept secret, but the cheapest license that you'll ever have. When is a license not required? And there's been a point of confusion about this. And basically you're selling the live animal on the hoof, or you're taking it to a plant and you're selling it by the quarter, half, and whole to the end consumer. What that's saying is, prior to that animal going to the plant, you need to have it sold. When you deliver that animal to the plant, you need to make sure that somebody's name on it. If you sold half to Jimmy and half to John, you need to let the plant know that prior to it being killed. And I'll tell you why. Because if it's a custom kill, it's important that you sell that live animal, okay? The buyer of the animal, if they can pick the meat up from the plant, or the seller can deliver the finished product directly from the plant to the buyer. They can offer delivery as a service. That's also important. I've had some people that have been a little confused about that. Money, that's another question that has come up, and we do not regulate money. So if you want to have them pay the bill at the plant, that's great. If you want to pay the bill and get your money from the buyer, That's great too. We will not regulate the monies on that. But when it comes to a question, we will look at the tracking of that to make sure that the animal was sold prior to the sale, okay? Okay, guidelines. This is really easy, and these are also on our meat and poultry on our webpage if you go to our KDA webpage. First thing to do, register as a wholesaler. I can't express that enough. I have so many people, I know they don't know to register, but I tell everybody, that's the first thing, register. It's on our KDA website under meat and poultry, go to wholesaler. Box product, let's say they put 50 beef sticks in a box. You have to sell that by the box unless each individual beef stick has a complete label on it. We refer to that as breaking bulk, and we don't allow it unless it is properly labeled. All product has to be inspected and passed. It either is federally with the mark of inspection or KDA inspected and passed with that mark of inspection. Again, KDA product has to be intrastate. It has to stay in the state of Kansas. It can go hotels, restaurants, institutions, schools, daycares, wherever you can get that product in, I'm good with it. Another thing to kind of point out is sometimes if you're selling at the farmer's market, sometimes a county, you might have to register with the county or other agencies. It's always interesting to see local government. Sometimes they want to know just who's in their town, okay? Facility, that it must be kept in a nice, clean manner. When I come in, I will actually look at your freezer. I'll look at the product in it. I will look above it. If you have paint or turpentine stored up above, I'll either have you move the freezer or move that product from there in case it spills and gets in the meat. I will ask you to have a rodent or an insect control program. I don't care if you hire it out or if you can perform those services yourself. Proper temperatures of freezers, of the coolers. That's important. Again, if you're ever called into court, and occasionally people do get sued, it is important you can produce a record and say, hey, my freezer was 37 degrees for these days. I don't tell you you have to take a temperature every day. If you take one once a week, once a day, you need to just keep those records. If you're going to transport it, you want to keep it fresh or frozen or 45 below fresh, or you can do it frozen. Again, the records associated with the business, keep the receipts from the locker plant. Your invoices, I recommend to everybody, keep a duplicate book with duplicate receipts, and also keep your temperature records. The important thing is traceability of this product. And I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say you take a bull in and you have 500 pounds of summer sausage done. You have an invoice from that locker plant. It says you have 500 pounds. All of a sudden, in about 2 months, somebody gets sick and your product comes back positive for Listeria or caught up during routine testing. If you have a duplicate invoice of at least somebody's name and phone number, and you can contact them, it might save you from putting your name in the newspaper, okay? So traceability is the key to selling meat right there. Poultry exemptions. This has got to be one of the most confusing parts of my job, and I cannot tell you, how's a good way to put this? The best thing I can tell you about the 1,000 bird exemption is I'm not going to ask you to register. You can do 1,000 birds from your residence to the end consumers. They have to come to the farm and pick that up. Okay. Sanitation. It's important to make sure that you can restrict the flies, that you produce a clean and wholesome product. Okay. Again, registration's not required. As far as the labeling goes, that's why that person is going to come to your farm. He has the ability to look at your farm and make an informed decision and ask questions. Now, anytime that there is more what we call a risk basis. So you've just went from 1,000 birds and you want to do 20,000 birds a year. What happened is your risk basis went up and the chance to make people sick has gone up from basically 1,000 to 20,000. So they're going to require a little bit more of your time, effort, and energy in this. And basically, you're going to slaughter them on your own premise, no more than 20,000 raised by you. That's important. You have to raise them, okay? Grower sells in a calendar year no more than 20,000. And here it says, he or she may not buy or sell poultry prepared under another exemption. We're only going to allow one exemption a year, okay? Poultry products distributed by the grower can only be within the state of Kansas. It cannot go interstate, okay? The important thing also is your poultry is healthy when slaughtered. Slaughter and processing at basically your premises are conducted using sanitary standards, practices, and procedures that produce a not adulterated product. So what is this going to basically entail? When I come out there, I'm going to expect to see a facility. It's going to have walls that are going to be smooth and pervious, easy to clean. You're going to have hot and cold running water. You're going to have a hand washing sink. You're going to have to prove to me that you can operate a poultry plant, or you will not be allowed for this exemption. So, and the reason is your birds are now allowed to go to the farmer's market, and they can actually be sold into other places. So anyway, with the risk comes a little bit of reward, but also you have to put a little bit more into it. And your shipping containers, this is also an important thing to know. You have to put the producer's name on it, which would be your name, your address, and the exemption, the PL stands for Public Law 90-492. That needs to be on there. And that way, if USDA comes in, they can actually see that you're producing under that public law. And with any exemption, again, I can't stress this enough. Keep the records associated with the business. Keep the records of the names, the addresses, and the telephone numbers of your people. Because if you end up with a Salmonella, Campylobacter recall or something like that, then that way you might not have to put your name in the paper, okay? So records are important. Even with the 1,000 birds, records are important. And I've had a lot of questions this year about rabbits. And basically what you can do is you can slaughter 250 rabbits or less in a calendar year without any inspection. I'm not going to require you to register. If I come in, it's because somebody complained about you, okay? The rabbits have to be of your own raising. You cannot engage in the business of buying and selling rabbits. Rabbits have to be distributed to the end consumer from the owner's own premise. So from your farm, you're going to distribute those. And only healthy rabbits can be slaughtered and not adulterated. So sanitation does apply out of your rabbits. And again, if your operation doesn't meet the exemption requirements, contact us and we'll talk about it, okay? And keep records. Exotic species. I run into this a lot. I'm just now working with somebody that's wanting to do pheasant or quail. According to the Federal Act, quail and pheasant, they do not meet the definition of what we call poultry. I know they're birds, but they just do not meet that definition. The definition is pretty much going to be chickens, turkeys, ostrich, emus, ratites, things like that, okay? So anyway, that's just something we're going to look at maybe expanding a little later on down the line. What that means is that basically you're going to pay for USDA inspection to make it amenable, which means to make the federal laws apply to your product. If you bring it to a KDA and we can do it, you won't be charged for it because it might be amenable to our act. So, but whether it's amenable or not, it might be the difference between you being charged or not. With KDA inspection, a lot of this can go interstate commerce if it's an exotic species. Let's use bison as an example. If you have a bison slaughtered under state inspection, it can go interstate commerce as long as it's single ingredient. And why is that? It's because it's not amenable to the USDA. And if they see it out there in commerce and there's an inspection legend on it from a state, and as long as that state recognizes the inspection legend, we're good to go, and USDA will just walk away from that product, okay? An example I kind of use, and this is a far stretch, but sometimes you will see Georgia state inspected quail. And if you look at quail, you'll see a little inspection legend up there. I think it's usually in the left-hand corner. It says Georgia state inspected. And that is an example of it's not amenable to our act or the federal act. It's got a state inspection legend on it, and it can go interstate commerce. So next time you're in the grocery store, take a peek at that sometime if they have them. It's always kind of interesting to see that. Bison, again with bison, USDA inspected bison, usually they'll add beef or pork to a multi-ingredient. One of them is summer sausage, your ground and formed jerky. And here's the deal with that. You're going to love this. Bison is considered an ingredient. It's just like salt and pepper. What they're inspecting is 2% cooked or 3% raw meat. That's what's inspected. And that's what the amenability laws state, or it's actually by policy. So if it has more than 2% cooked or 3% raw meat is added into bison, let's say you add 3 pounds of ground beef to 100 pounds of bison, that's 3%, or to 97 pounds of bison, that's 3. And they can actually put the USDA mark of inspection on that. Now, FDA can also come in and regulate some exotic meat species such as llama and yak. And I have a lot of people say, I don't understand how you can have llama out into commerce. But plants, all it takes is that a plant is registered with the Bioterrorism Act and they can have an FDA inspection. And our retail program does the FDA inspections in Kansas. So it's not very common, but let's say a USDA plant wants to kill a yak or a llama. Let's use a llama. So a USDA plant kills a llama. We will come in and maybe do an FDA inspection prior to that. And what an FDA inspection basically is a sanitation inspection. And as long as he's registered with the Bioterrorism Act, he's good to go. So general information, I did have another slide in here that I basically explained, go to divisions and programs, go to this, go to that. But as you can tell, if you can just go into Google up the Kansas Department of Agriculture, go into divisions and programs and go into the meat and poultry, you can pretty much get down into the poultry exemptions or rabbit operations exemptions, your inspected or custom operations. You can also look to see who is licensed as a KDA fully inspected plant or even a USDA licensed facility. Or even this year, we even added some deer processors because a lot of plants were doing deer. So a lot of good information on that page, and I highly recommend everybody to go in there and look at that. And anyway, how to reach us, I tell everybody 785-564-6776. That's the best way. That is Krista Moore's phone number, or hopefully you can get a hold of anybody answering the phone at that time. And she takes care of a lot of registrations. And anyway, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Mike. We appreciate it a lot. Dana, what questions do we have that still need answering, or what things would you like to read live for everybody?
Well, great. Mike, I'll let you, excuse me, get a drink of water here for a second. I just wanted to let everybody know there were some questions in the Q&A about scales. And so I just want to reiterate that Kansas vendors can get their scales, their sales scales tested and certified by the Kansas Department of Agriculture as part of their registration for these sessions. Vendors planning to get their scales certified will need to provide up to 5 years of scale test reports, or if the scale has never been certified, it must have an active NTEP certification of conformance. If you indicated you wanted your scale certified when you registered for these sessions, you should have received an email with the dates and locations the certifications are being offered. If you did not receive that email, please contact Robin at robin.bloom@ks.gov. And I actually submitted her email contact a little bit earlier, so you guys should have that. So that's a little bit on the scales with it. There's information available to that to you to get that done. So Mike, I have a couple questions for you that have not been answered yet. And one of them is in the Q&A right now. It says, I do only 200 or 50 fewer, I'm guessing that would be on poultry, with it, and have an inspected facility process them. Am I still exempt?
You're not. Anytime that you take those birds to an inspected facility, you are selling inspected and passed meat, and you just need to register as a wholesaler with me. And then I'll come out, visit you once a year, see how you store your birds, and basically check your records, and make sure that the product is properly labeled and inspected and passed. So registration is all that's required if you're using an inspected facility.
Got
Just to
it.
piggyback on that, Mike, the 1,000 bird exemption, where this person would be doing 250, they can't handle any other poultry other than the 1,000 birds. So like he said in the presentation, there's only one exemption allowed for each one of those categories. So if you're doing 250 birds inspected, you would not qualify for the 1,000 bird exemption.
And we just got clarification from the person who submitted the question. It's on rabbits. So if you would like to give that answer for rabbits, that would be great.
Okay, are they using an inspected facility for rabbits?
Yes, they are.
Okay, same deal. All he's got to do is register as a wholesaler with me, and it's $25 license fee. I'll come out once a year, do basically an inspection, look at his labeling, do a Q&A with him, and that's it. So anytime you handle inspected and passed product, it requires registration.
Great. I do have a question as a follow-up to one of your slides when you were talking on poultry and on the PL 90-492 exemptions. You mentioned being able to sell to farmers markets and other. Is that restaurants, grocery stores, etc.? What might be some examples of other with that exemption?
I have seen exempted birds into retail stores. I've seen them into local meat markets, places like that. So it has opened up the market quite a bit. A lot of times you won't even realize it because they'll, like, let's say you sell them into a local meat market, they'll take them out of the package and present them right there in their local case, and you don't even realize that they're even an exempted bird. So I've seen that, but yes, it'll opens up the market a lot. Wherever you can get them in, you can, whether it's a hotel, restaurant, institution, you can sell those birds to it. So, but again, like I say, it does take basically a facility that is up to standards to do that. And when I come out, I'm pretty stringent on people utilizing the 20,000 bird exemption. I have a list of requirements. So I tell everybody, don't ask for forgiveness, ask for permission, and we'll get you through it. So, because it does take time.
Absolute great information there. So one question that we hear out and about in the state with farmers markets and other, how do folks ensure to their customers that the meat that they're selling really is the meat that those folks raise? So I'm a customer at the farmers market, you're the producer selling. What would you need to inform or educate the consumers on letting them know that that meat really is yours?
That's kind of a tough one, but I guess a good way to put it is if you're at the farmer's market, you have face-to-face interaction with that vendor. And that is just something that's important to have a relationship with that person. And you'll notice that those people don't just show up at the farmer's market and usually leave. They're there for the duration from April until November, and create a dialogue with them. Ask them, where do you get your meat from? Do you raise it? Do you do this? Do you do this? Most people, and I always tell everybody, this is the most important part of agriculture, and I cannot stress this enough. Everybody has a story. I have a story about my farm, my cattle that I raise. I would gladly, as a producer, I would gladly share that with you over a farmer's market table anytime. And that's important. You need to know everybody's story that you do business with. So
Great. And that meat is tagged at the locker when it's at the facility. So that tag stays with that animal throughout. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah, there's traceability all the way through it. I mean, when that animal is brought in, let's say I'm going to go to the farmer's market, I will bring that beef into a locker plant. My name will be on that beef all the way through it. I can walk in that cooler at any time. I can request to look at my beef hanging. Let's say the beef is hanging a month and I want it to do that, and the locker plant agrees. In 28 days, I can go in there and I can ask that locker plant, can I look at that beef? And he can take me right to it. He'll show me my name on it. After it's done processing, my name is on the bags of meat. When it's brought to me, my names are on that bag of meat. So there's traceability all the way through the process. So now here, I do end up with this. Sometimes people do say, hey, I don't think this was my meat that I got back from the locker plant. Could it happen? I could tell you, yes, it could. All it takes is the flick of a pen with the wrong name and it could happen. But does it happen very often? I don't think so, because that locker plant has a reputation to maintain, and he is going to do what it takes to maintain that reputation. And you not getting your meat back, he doesn't want that to happen. He wants you to get and he wants you to be happy. So.
Well, that's great information for those that are listening or may watch the webinar at a later date to know on that traceability piece when they're talking to their consumers at the farmers markets. So that is so vitally important. There's a question in the Q&A that asks, is there resources available for making labels for produce and meat? Label requirements or examples of those?
You can always go to Google and Google up labels, but really if you look at 9 CFR 317.2, it will tell you all the features of a label. And I'm not going to lie to you, it is a huge regulation and it can be very confusing at times. But if people want a label, this is what I ask them to do. If you go to that locker plant, you can ask to talk to an inspector, and that inspector, whether he's on the kill floor or wherever, he might be able to squeeze a little time in, or either you could even call the office for that matter. But the inspector could actually ask you what you need for a label, and he could take you through the process right there. Or the locker plant, a lot of times, will go through that label process for you. He actually has to have an approved label from us. And if you want certain things on that label or claims, we'll ask you to make an affidavit. If you want it grass fattened and fed, then anyway, we're going to ask questions about that and have you sign an affidavit. So anyway, you can work through the inspector, you can work through the plant owner, you could Google up the regulation 9 CFR 317.2, read through it and make your own sketch for that matter. So
just to piggyback on that, labels cannot be made and put on anywhere other than the place where that product was processed.
Yeah, that's a violation of the law to apply the KDA or the USDA mark of inspection without so being inspected and passed, okay?
And we also have our partners at K-State, Dr. Liz Boyle in animal science. She also works with nutritional labeling if you're needing to do shelf life evaluation with meat products and stuff. So just want to remind everyone else, I also put that in the chat box that if you're looking for that information, you can also reach out to K-State. And if you happen to be a From the Land of Kansas member, you can also get some discounted rates with them.
Great. I have a question, Mike. Why does the meat and poultry license cost so much less than the health department food safety license?
Believe it or not, we want to get people into business, and a $25 fee, you're absolutely right. It doesn't even cost it doesn't even pay the gas money and my time to come out, but we don't want to be a barrier of entry into a business. And we feel $25 is very reasonable. And it's just not only your license. If you look through that, you'll see that even an inspected locker plant is only $25. People don't realize the monies that come in, they go to basically a general fund and they're distributed. So, we don't run our program by that, and we receive funding from the USDA also. So anyway, that's why the license is so cheap. We just don't want to create a barrier to entry. So
got it. So there are different funding mechanisms between the meat and poultry division and the food safety division. And so we recognize that. So thanks on that. Another question that has come in the Q&A is, I raise sheep in Kansas. The preferred processor that I've worked with for the custom work is in Nebraska. When I get the processed animal with label and inspection done in Nebraska, is there anything else I need to be aware of for selling direct to consumer in Kansas? So sheep processed across state lines and then brought back.
Again, the programs are all pretty much ran the same way with the 9 CFR 317.2 or 317.2, the labeling laws. Mike, is it 417 or 317?
317.2,
Yeah,
but
317.2.
Nebraska does not maintain a state inspection program. So they're either federally inspected. And so if it's an inspected facility, that product can go back and forth from the state lines as long as it's labeled properly, no problems. The other thing though, if you're dealing with a custom plant on the Nebraska side, that product is just like custom product in Kansas. It has to go back to the individual that delivered that animal for slaughter.
Yeah, and kind of like what Mike said too, it is USDA inspected and passed, so it can go interstate commerce. Now, I've had a lot of people ask, okay, what if I bring a Nebraska sheep over here and let's say I just bring the whole carcass and it's wrapped and inspected and passed. Let's say I take that to a state of Kansas locker plant. Can they further process that animal? And the answer is yes. A locker plant can handle inspected and passed product, and they can basically slice, dice, mince, add the ingredients to it, do what you want, and they can wrap it, and then it will be downgraded into a state inspection instead of a federal inspection. So, you know, that's just, I have a lot of people that do carcasses outside, and then they will transport them back to Kansas for further processing. And that
if it was custom in Nebraska and transported across the line by the individual that owned the animal, it could be done in a state or custom plant in Kansas, but it'd have to be still labeled not for sale.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's a lot of great information. And I actually have two questions that came in that are very similar. It states that their processor only puts the processing information and not their farm name on it. Is it okay to add a label with just the farm name and the website after receiving the meat, as long as the original label is intact?
As long as it's truthful and it doesn't cover up any other part of the label that the processor put on there, yes, you can do that.
I was going to say, I've had that happen before where, believe it or not, I've had somebody totally white wrap over and put their own label on it, where they took all the plant's information off until you open the white wrap. So I had to have them unwrap all of that. So it actually had the mark of inspection. And it's like what Mike said, it's very important. Don't cover up anything on the original label. But as long as it's truthful, put it on the back and you'll be fine. So.
Well, great. For those that are listening in, watching today, we have a few more minutes left. So if you have any additional questions, please make sure you put those in the question and answer section. We'll get those going. It's confusing to me, Mike, and I've been on a number of webinars regarding meat and the inspection. But why can't state inspected products cross state lines if it's equal to? How does that work? Can you maybe break that down for me just a little bit more in layman's terms on it? Because sometimes I still get confused.
Mr. Pierce, I'm going to let you discuss that because that's a sore spot with me.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is it's the federal law that was written when they wrote the laws that state inspected product could not be transported out of the state. And to be honest now, it really just has become a political issue. We still run an equal to program. We're still funded 50% by the USDA. They did put a program in place several years ago, and I can't remember the number of the farm bill, maybe 2014. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but it's in the farm bill where the USDA did create a program that allows state inspected product to go across state lines. Now, the caveat there is you have to have the program in your state. The state has to meet all the requirements of that program. And then that facility that is entering into that program has to be reviewed quarterly by the federal program. So is it possible? Yes. It was kind of like the carrot on the stick that the donkey never got to. It's just easier if you're wanting to do that as an establishment, or that establishment has a desire to send product across the state line. It's really easier for them to just become an actual USDA inspected facility. They don't have to jump through the hoops. The state doesn't have to meet the requirements. And I mean, it's a long story, but our state may have a problem in meeting those requirements because we have to adopt everything that the federal program does then through the legislature. And in the past, we have had some issues with adopting federal law into the state law. So there's no really good answer to why it can't go across the state lines, other than that is the way the law is written right now. There's been a tremendous amount of inquiries about whether that could be changed due to the pandemic and the situation of the meat shortage. But so far, the federal program has said it requires Congress to change the law, and they don't have the desire to do that right now. So that's the best I can tell you at this time.
Well, great. So we've got that part figured out. We had another question come in during the Q&A with it while you guys were talking about that. What is the shelf life of beef sticks and how should they be stored?
You know, shelf life is one of those things. It depends on how it's handled. I always tell everybody, anytime, and if you think of the composition of meat sticks and what the plant has done, or whether you're doing hams or bacons, you're taking that product and you're either pumping it or you're adding sugar, salt, and spices to that. And people at your freezer temperature, most freezers are about 7-8 degrees. With all that sugar, salt, and spices, you really need to get that down there to about -10 or -20 to give it a year of shelf life. I tell everybody, you know, sometimes your bacons, you might only get 90 to 120 days out of your bacons before you start noticing an off flavor because of the way everything's pumped in there and the chemistry of that now. If we just look at single cuts of meat, I've had meat in my freezer for a year and it's been just fine. And again, it depends on your freezer. Let's say that you have a freezer that is frost free and it'll hit defrost every once in a while. Whereas then you have one that builds up ice over a year that you have to manually defrost. If it keeps getting heated up and then cooled down, heated up, cooled down, you have less of a shelf life with that freezer versus another one. So there's a lot of different things. It's going to depend on the chemistry that you've done. It's going to depend on your freezer. I would like to think that you could, you know, I tell everybody, if you're in doubt about selling it, eat it. So, but I would think you could get a year out of regular cuts. And if your freezer was good, I would think, you know, 4 to 8 months, you should be able to keep your beef sticks and stuff. So.
Great. We had another question or two come in while you guys were helping with that shelf life question. And with that, Dr. Boyle at K-State does shelf life evaluations, and that link has been put into the chat. So those logged in can have that information. So we had a question concerning custom beef sales. If the person, the producer, takes an order for 1/4 of a beef and they've received a deposit, does that constitute a sale? As they sell by the hanging weight at the locker to the final bill can't be calculated until after slaughter. What is that point that your team would consider a sale?
If he delivers that animal, if the owner of the animal delivers it to a custom plant, and he tells half goes to Jimmy, half goes to Joe, that's a sale to me. Their name is on that beef. That constitutes a sale to me. Now, just to kind of let you know about a custom plant, and I always warn my wholesalers about this, or anybody thinking about going the meat business. If you use a custom plant and somebody backs out of you, and let's say, let's say I had half and you had half, Dana. I call up the owner of the animal. I say, hey, I cannot afford a $2,000 beef this month. My kid just had a broken tooth. Now, at that point in time, I've backed out of the sale. Guess what happens to that meat? It reverts back to the original owner of the animal. So the guy that brought that beef in, he is going to eat that half of beef. So, and it cannot be resold because it is against the law to sell uninspected product. And that's exactly what that is. When it goes through a custom plant, it received no inspection during the slaughter and it received no inspection during the processing. Now, to further back up, we do have some plants that, believe it or not, are inspected on the kill floor. They're inspected slaughter, but they downgrade everything to custom, not for sale, or custom at the end. Now, here's a little trick. If you're using that plant and he lets that beef hang 2 weeks, so if you call me after the kill and you say, hey, Mike, the hanging weight was 800 pounds of that meat or 800 pounds on your side of beef, and I say, I can't afford it. You can resell that beef because it is inspected on the kill floor. So it's important for everybody to understand you have inspected slaughter and you have inspected processing. And if you use inspected slaughter, it might give you 2 to 3 weeks grace period to resell that side. So that's a little caveat to the business right there. So, and kind of what you said too, Dana, about receiving, say if I put down, if they required a $200 deposit, I call that smart business. Because at that point in time, it puts a little bit of my dog into the hunt, and I'm more apt to come up with the rest of the money. So anyway, it just depends on how I don't tell people how to run their business, but I know what I would be asking. So
Great. I have one more question for you before we wrap up with it. And the question is, as we know, a lot of folks that are with farmers markets or sell direct to consumer do a lot of different things on their farm with it. So what are the requirements if someone wants to add spices that they've grown on their farm to meat for flavoring, such as for bratwurst that are made at an inspected facility? I don't see how you guys roll that off your tongue all the time. An inspected facility for retail sales.
Mike, you want to answer that one?
Well, there's a list of safe and suitable ingredients out there, and it would be an agreement made between the plant and the individual. If the plant wants to add those particular spices that were grown and they feel like they're acceptable, then that would be an agreement between them. We would probably not have a problem with it unless we saw that there was a problem with the spices, such as an adulteration. But I don't see that as happening.
And another thing to really make important on this, spices, when you think about the nature of them, they are grown outside. And spices, there's a reason that a lot of times you'll see them irradiated because they just carry a lot of microbial growth on them. So anyway, it's important to understand that is a risky deal that you're doing, but it can be done. Just make sure that you just can't have a secret ingredient spice and show up with the plant, because that plant is held accountable and goes through a label approval process for your meat. So if you want to sneak a spice into a summer sausage, you're going to have to let the plant owner know. The plant owner is going to let the inspector know. The inspector is going to have to do the label approval, because anytime that, if you look at a multi-ingredient product, it goes from ascending to descending. So anyway, there's an order of predominance of those ingredients, and it all has to be there so people understand it's truth in labeling. So.
Well, great. We're finished with time, Mike, but what I've really grasped today is there really needs to be a terrific working relationship between the producer and the inspector, the processing facility, the producer, the processing facility, and all of our consumers across the state. So the best thing is, if you have questions, to reach out to someone and ask before you doing. Like you said earlier, it's easier to ask for permission than beg for forgiveness on that. So again, it sounds like communication is the key for this, and it sounds great. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the Janelle so she can wrap things up. And thank you, Mike and Mike, for your information today.
Yes, thanks guys so much. We really appreciate it. And thanks Dana for helping us get all those questions answered for everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You should be looking for an evaluation that you'll get on Friday afternoon once the webinar series is complete. It really assists our team in helping figure out what all topics you want to learn about. So I would really like it if you would answer that evaluation. And hopefully we've also been able to answer all your questions about scales and all of the meat and poultry ones today, but always feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything. We will definitely connect you with the correct folks. And you will receive an email next week with all of the recordings so you can rewatch any of these things if you want to check some of those details. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at 785-564-6759 or at fromthelandofkansas@ks.gov. Otherwise, we'll hope to see you tomorrow, same time, Thursday at 1 p.m., where we'll be talking about sales tax and then SNAP and EBT, or on Friday for our sessions from 8:30 to 12:30, where we'll be covering all the different topics that Londa talked about at the beginning. And we will see you then. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.